Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Ralph World. I'm Mac, and with me, as always, is
Uncle Britt.
So we've been gone for a while. The world got weird for us.
It did. A lot of... He got sick, then I got sick, and...
Holidays happened.
Nothing happened at the same time, I'll tell you that. It was very checkered.
Not a thing fell in line with each other. But part of our New Year's resolution, our joint New Year's resolution, we wanted to get back in on this. We wanted to come at this with new energy, new topics, new things to discuss. We're even, if you're listening on Spotify, this isn't going to mean anything to you, but if you're watching on YouTube, we're even in a new location. I think the acoustics are better in here. Hopefully, if you're listening, it makes a difference for you.
It feels just a little more casual, which is what we have wanted to do since the beginning, was more so make it feel like you're joining in on a conversation we're having versus us talking to you.
Right. We moved out of the kitchen and basically into my living room, which has, for us, it's a much more comfortable feeling, much more engaging feeling, hopefully. So, having said that, wanting to be more friendly and engaging and welcoming to all walks of life, we decided to kick back into the swing of things with a topic that has absolutely no controversy behind it whatsoever.
None at all. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure audiences and fans alike are unanimous on their belief or even view of this group that we're going to discuss.
Oh, 100%. No issues here.
No division, I would say.
We're, of course, talking about the rise, fall, and death of the DC Extended Universe.
Yes. The one we all famously love that Marvel tried ripping off. Failed.
In all seriousness, let's just start off by saying Uncle Britt and I both understand that there are legitimate fans of this series. But you cannot deny that it is a failed experiment. What it's a failed experiment of, we will touch on at the end when we get to that. But first, we need to go down the timeline of the DCEU, look at what worked, look at what didn't work, because, Britt, I believe you and I are of the same ilk that, like, we don't believe it was all bad. Like, I'm not sure there was anything ever great, but I don't think it was all bad.
It didn't reach it didn't reach highs like Marvel did. While Marvel still has legitimate gripes with, the Infinity Saga and everything, especially just towards the end, the movies were getting very formulaic. But there were still highs. There were still moments that you were like, this is so cool, even if the plot leading up to it was kind of subpar. With the DC...
The Captain America trilogy stands out in my head, to be completely honest.
But that, you flip over to DC, and it's hard to pick moments, because the moments that stood out to me are bad moments. Like, the one that stands out immediately every time we talk DCEU, Man of Steel, Superman snaps a person's neck. Like, Superman killed someone in his first movie.
And for a lot of the DC movies, like, the thing that let's not even say for DC movies. For a lot of movies, for me, the thing that stands out, the thing that makes me say, oh man, I love that movie, or oh man, I really disliked that movie, is remembering key moments of the movie.
Yes.
Unfortunately, with a lot of the DC movies, and let's just also state this, that between the two of us, the only one that we haven't seen is the new Aquaman movie.
Oh, yeah.
Lost Kingdom.
And I'll be honest, I have no real desire to see that.
Neither do I.
Even in the context of, like, talking about the DCEU, because of Heard, personally.
So, but we haven't seen that one. So that's the only one that we're really not going to be able to comment on firsthand. But the movies, the majority of the DC movies that I've watched, like, it doesn't have good or bad moments that stand out to me. It's just a blank slate when I try to think back to it.
Even sitting here right now as you were talking, I'm trying to think of like what is a moment that stands out to me through any of the movies. And the one moment that I'm like, of course this should have stood out, is when you saw Wonder Woman, Superman, and Batman together on screen the first time, the Trinity together. That was such a subpar scene because they're just standing in smoke and then they immediately disperse.
And you saw that in the trailer.
Yeah.
So like even the impact of seeing them on the big screen for the first time was diluted because they used that shot in the trailer. So before we start to attack things like that, let's go down the timeline. Let's do a brief rundown of the movies because I really feel like there's a pattern that you can start to see developing as these movies go on.
And I think it's worth noting before we delve deep into this, you're getting two different viewpoints here.
Yeah.
You have a man who is almost grew up with DC and its properties and the various
aspects.
I was going to say assets, but aspects of it.
Okay.
And then you have someone like me who has grown up in a world where it is almost synonymous with the mainstream, not in depth, but just DC superheroes,
right.
Superman, Batman.
The marketing machine is
yes.
with the cartoons, the video games, and what we're talking about today, the DCEU.
So I've had a lifetime of very casual viewing and information from this property and the several properties within. But by no means would I say I am an expert on anything. I have just seen a lot of the movies.
Whereas I have been, even though I wasn't alive in '66, I've pretty much been involved with, I shouldn't say involved, invested, interested in.
They've been consulting with me since West.
That's actually what I was about to say. Like, my journey with DC started with the Batman '66 series, and then Challenge of the Super Friends, and the properties that came after that, leading right up to Batman '89, which we talked about it in our first episode. So even though like I talk a lot about Batman '89 and I talk like how much I love that movie, how much that movie means to me, it wasn't my first exposure to DC because also we can't forget the Superman movies, the Reeve Superman movies. Like, and I'm not bringing that up to compare it to Man of Steel or anything, but like it came first.
Yeah.
And like that was one of my first big introductions into DC Comics. And then even when I was reading comics, it was back in the day when like they were basically playing second fiddle to Marvel on the newsstands, to be completely honest. Like people read Marvel, people knew about DC. Like I feel like DC didn't get a real big notice from the general public until '85 when Crisis on Infinite Earths came out. But that is a discussion for another time because I could do a whole story on that. We could do a whole episode on that.
As I said, lifelong.
Now, something else that I want to talk about. If you're watching this on YouTube, you may be aware that, and this kind of burned me, about a week after we came up with the idea to do this, a YouTube channel called Comicstorian did basically exactly the same thing. Now, we are not copying him. I want to make that clear. Facts are facts, numbers are numbers. You can't dispute that. One thing he does get into, and if you're watching this on YouTube, I'll put a link in the description below, is that he does get into a lot of the behind-the-scenes controversies that was going on with that. That's not something we're really going to be getting into.
No.
We're doing more like things like box office, audience response, things like that. But if you want to get into a little bit more behind the scenes of things that was going on, Comicstorian did a real good episode about that. I'll put the link in the description below. But starting off, back to 1983 with Action Comics #1 at the World's Fair.
The dawn of DC.
Quite literally, the dawn of the superhero comic. Superman made his debut at the World's Fair. We'll fast forward a few years to the early 2000s.
Introduction. All right, you're alive now.
The very interesting thing to me is 2005, Batman Begins came out. 2008, Iron Man came out, and the MCU was born.
And just to give context for me, Christian Bale is like my first exposure to Batman. Like, I'm not saying he's my Batman, but like when I was growing up, when anyone said Batman, it was Christian Bale. Yeah.
Okay. For a very long time, Warner Brothers did not worry about a joined universe. DC Comics really felt like the Trinity could stand on its own. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. Like, they were the three pillars. Like, there's a reason they're called the Trinity, like, in comics and out of comics. They were the three pillars that DC was basically built on. So they thought those three could own their own franchises. Warner Brothers felt it was just Superman and Batman, because who wants to see a movie about women? And quite honestly, back in the 70s and 80s, they may not have been wrong, to be completely honest.
I mean, it's a different culture than today.
Yeah.
It's a different culture than even 70s to the 90s.
So that's why, like, even though DC was in the movie theaters first, they never even considered bringing the two of them together, because Batman was Batman, Superman was Superman, and the only real connection you had was an offhanded comment in Batman and Robin for all movies, when Batman says, "This is why Superman works alone." That's really, like, that was the first hint that they existed in the same world, and, like, actually kind of got us a little jazzed, because we knew there was going to be another Superman movie, well, quote unquote knew there was going to be another Superman movie coming out, and we thought that was like a hint of things to come.
Oh, dude, that's probably exactly what it felt like. I think it was when I watched Iron Man 2 and saw the Captain America prototype shield in there.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, dude, that's Captain America. What's going on here?
Yeah, exactly. So when Iron Man came out in 2008, and let's just face it, that is the dawn of the MCU. That's the birth of the MCU. Whether they knew it was going to explode into what it became or not, that was there was a plan set in motion, and Warner Brothers caught wind of this. That sometime between, let me see the dates here, sometime between 2008, which was also the release of The Dark Knight, and 2012, which was the release of The Dark Knight Rises, Warner Brothers went to Nolan and asked him if they could use his trilogy to start the DC cinematic universe. Him and Bale both said no, because I think the majority of listeners know that, like, Nolan and Bale historically wanted this to be a very grounded, very realistic, standalone set of movies. Like, it was not supposed to lead into anything else. It was not supposed to be bigger than what it was. And because of how realistic it was, I don't think they even considered it being part of, like, a superhero universe, because it was too real for a comic book, to be completely honest. And I'm not dissing those movies. I like those movies, but they're not quote unquote comic book movies.
If you took those movies and you had Superman show up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Even if you had, like, a darker version of Superman, like kind of how Man of Steel approached Superman, it just wouldn't vibe at all. So that was definitely a good call on their part to separate that before the DCEU. But, you know, clearly another decision caused some issues somewhere on this timeline.
So when Nolan said no, which I'm guessing was somewhere around 2009, 2010, somewhere in there. When Nolan said no, that was when they decided to kick off the DC universe with Green Lantern, that Ryan Reynolds movie that, let's face it, it didn't do good. It wasn't good. But also, if you watch it, it is, even though it's Green Lantern, the plot, the character development, the characterization, it is 100% an Iron Man clone, I feel like. Like, not page for page, word for word, but, like, it has that same feel, that same vibe, like that they were, from the beginning, I think that's what one of the things that hamstrung the DCEU was that they tried to copy what Marvel did, rather than being their own thing.
And that's how it became formulaic.
Right. So, as a comparison, in 2008, Iron Man made $585 million. Green Lantern made $220 million, so less than half of what Iron Man made. Also, I think it's interesting to note, and this is going to come up, is that Iron Man only made $585 million, which is respectable, don't get me wrong, but compared to what they're making now, that's a drop in the hat. And I think that's one of the things that hamstrung the DCEU, and we'll get to that in a second. Because after Green Lantern came out, and Green Lantern was a bomb, also in 2011, you had the launch of the New 52, which we'll get back to that. I just want to bookmark that for right now. In 2012, the Avengers came out, and it was the first comic, I believe it was the first comic book movie that broke $1 billion.
That sounds right to me.
I think The Dark Knight got really close. I don't have the numbers in front of me, so I could be wrong about this. But I think The Dark Knight got really close. But I think The Avengers was the first Marvel/DC movie that broke $1 billion.
Which this doesn't necessarily have to do with the timeline, but I think it might be interesting if Heath Ledger was able to return as the Joker in that following movie. If that would have been the one to get it first.
The Dark Knight Rises.
Because
if he would have come back like he was supposed to.
Because I know you're not the biggest fan of that interpretation, but it was very popular.
I do not deny how popular it was, and I do not deny the impact that it had. And it's true. I've never been a fan of that version of the Joker, but I can't deny the impact that it had. Now, in 2013 is when The Man of Steel came out. Now, here's the thing. We go back to what we talked about at the beginning of the episode. That Warner Brothers and DC both saw Batman and Superman as their own standalone franchises. There are rumors, and I do not know how true this is, I do not know how false this is, but there are rumors that after Green Lantern bombed, Man of Steel was already into production, and Man of Steel was supposed to be its own thing. It wasn't supposed to be the launch of the DCEU, possibly not even supposed to be tied into the DCEU, because it was Superman. And like we said, Superman and Batman, they viewed as being able to stand on their own. When Green Lantern failed, the rumor is that they went to Snyder and said, hey, we want you to do this. Basically start the DCEU. This is what we're going after. And they pointed to the Avengers. And basically it was like, you could be the Kevin Feige of, like, that's what they lured him in with, and that's when the deals started to be made. I want to make a trilogy, I want to have creative control, blah 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 blah. Okay, so that is a rumor. I have zero proof of that, but like, that is a rumor that you can find, and it kind of makes sense though, because after Green Lantern tanked in 2011, then Man of Steel came out in 2013, and all of a sudden, that's the beginning of the DCEU. I know that's 2 years in between, but 2 years for film production, you
already had to have the ball rolling. Yeah. You had to have things confirmed, cast, everything.
Yeah, Man of Steel would have already had to have been in some type of production or pre-production while Green Lantern was dying in the box office. So in 2013, we had Man of Steel. And then in 2016, we had Batman v Superman, The Dawn of Justice. Still the worst title for a movie ever. The movie that launched 1,000 memes. Okay? And all of the problems that came with. And once again, going by this rumor that when they brought in Zack Snyder, he was directing Man of Steel, and when they offered him the position of honchoing this DC cinematic universe, part of his request for creative control was he was the one that wanted to do Batman v Superman, wanted to do Batman against Superman in the second movie. And this is, I think, the first real stumbling block that the DCEU has. That the Monsterverse did Batman versus Superman, or Superman versus Batman, better with Godzilla versus Kong. No, I'm being dead serious. Like, you got Godzilla, who is just the big, strong dude, okay? He's the one with the flame breath. He's the one with the strength. He's the king of all monsters. And then you have King Kong, who can't match Godzilla in abilities, but what did they do? They gave him technology. They gave him the axe. And who won? Superman. Godzilla. Godzilla beat the crap out of that big monkey.
He deserved it.
They had to defibrillate him, for goodness sakes, just to kickstart his heart. In Batman v Superman, you have why did you say that name?
Yeah. Which, I have not read many comics in my day, but The Dark Knight, what was it, The Dark Knight Returns?
The Dark Knight Returns.
The Dark Knight Returns I have read, and that is what is the quintessential story of Batman versus Superman. Vastly different context than what this movie says it is.
Yes.
But it's one of my personal favorite comic book stories of all time because it's not as simple as, oh, Batman versus Superman. Let's see who would win power-wise, because obviously Superman would kill Bruce if he really wanted to. But that wasn't what the fight was about. The fight was about something bigger. It was about the ideology behind a simple man with enough time, dedication, patience, funding, resources, can get himself to a place that he can make this seemingly invincible god bleed.
And that's something that I think a lot of people, whenever they are talking about Batman v Superman and saying, well, it was just like the comic, it wasn't, for a number of reasons. First of all, Superman had recently just tanked a nuke, so he wasn't at full power. Second, Bruce was his best friend. He was holding back. How people don't understand that is beyond me. In this, they just met. There's no emotional connection between the two of them. There's nothing that makes Clark, other than not wanting to be a murderer again, to hold back. Also, don't forget that armor that Batman was wearing, he plugged into the city power grid.
Yeah.
He was hitting Superman with a city.
And dude, even to the point at the end of the fight when Batman's just holding Superman down and Superman's battered and bloody. I'm talking about the comic, not the movie.
Because he let it happen.
Yes. And Bruce is giving this awesome line about, you know, the line's not important, but he's just giving this awesome mini speech to Supes. And Supes is sitting there saying, stop, Bruce, your heart, stop.
I just broke 2 of your ribs. Yeah.
Like, the entire time, you can tell this isn't a serious fight for Superman. But
killing...
what it is a horrible, horrible confrontation with what should be his best friend.
Emotionally, it's killing him to do this.
It's not about the fight, and that is the only way a Batman versus Superman plot is even intriguing, let alone good.
Right.
Because Superman would win.
Because let's even say, okay, in this movie, Batman has a spear with a kryptonite tip. Superman can fly and can shoot lasers out of his eyes.
He's also like, in the context of these movies, he's almost as fast as the Flash, or at least in a very similar league. He could just literally grab the spear.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, like, so you crammed in The Dark Knight Returns.
Oh my god, dude. Yeah.
With Trinity, because you meet the trilogy in this, and then also the death of Superman.
It just occurred to me, like, right this second, that this movie put together 2 of my absolute favorite comic book stories
and
that I've read.
And killed both of them.
And I never even put that together. I was so mad about the Dark Knight Returns part of it, I completely forgot about
the death of Superman.
I forgot about how they butchered the first ever comic story I read, which was the death of Superman.
Well, and that's the other side of it, that, like, there's no emotional investment in the death of Superman either. Like, Superman in the comic, and this is not meant to turn into a comic versus movie, because things change with the movie adaptations. We're aware of that. But I think it does lend context to what was emotionally engaging about the original stories, that Supes was the only one that could face Doomsday. In this movie, Wonder Woman was kind of laughing while she was fighting Doomsday.
Smacking him around a little bit.
Yeah, like, they should have, like, you have Wonder Woman, who has been training in, like, martial combat for hundreds, maybe 1,000 years at this point.
Is a demigod.
And is, you know, trained in the use of melee weapons. Give her the freaking spear. In the story, what made the Superman's death so impactful and so brutal is that he was the only one that could go against Doomsday. He was the line that Doomsday could not cross.
And it's worth pointing out, it was not a like clear victory.
No.
Like Superman was not leagues above this dude. Superman showed up and then Doomsday showed up.
He said goodbye to Lois before he went after the monster. And they beat each other to death. Later we found out that it was, quote unquote Kryptonian coma, whatever. I still don't believe we fell for that. I was part of that group. I still don't believe as a society we fell for that.
The first time you pull a trick is the best time you pull a trick.
Yeah. And they just beat the crap out of each other. In Batman v Superman, it took me 10 minutes to figure out why Superman even died. Well, maybe not 10 minutes, but...
Just way past that point. How did Superman die, guys?
Yeah, the kryptonite spear.
What? What spear?
Hey, man, I told you, blank slate when I walked out of those movies.
Needless to say, the reason why I kind of explained those two plots is because you have these two, in the realm of comic book, very important and very fan opinionated plot lines that are very popular, and you shove them in the second main movie of your extended universe, and it's like, you have built nothing up to set up either one of these. One of these, first of all, takes place when Bruce is an old man. It's sort of like his Logan story.
Yeah.
Like, this is supposed to be the end of the Batman, like him and everything. And then the other one is the literal death of Superman. The second movie you're going to try to pull... No one's going to believe that he died. And outside of that, you cannot do two so polar opposite stories and try to make a plot out of that, because all you're going to get left with is, okay, so we have to hit this point, this point, and this point. You just need to write how they get there.
And with pulling the death of Superman into the second movie, there's no audience invested. There's no audience investment in Superman at that point. That I feel like this movie makes the mistake that a lot of fan-driven IPs, we've talked about this, that World of Warcraft movie suffered from this as well, that it relied too much on your familiarity with a different media.
Yes.
It relied too much on your familiarity with the comic to have any investment in this movie. Because the version of Superman we saw in Man of Steel, there wasn't a whole lot to get invested in because he was very dour. He wasn't very personable. He wasn't very charismatic. You couldn't really relate to him. And then they tried to do that a little bit with making his mother the hostage. And oh God, we didn't even talk about the mistake of Lex. But we're not going that's going to take too long. But there was no real audience investment in it. That I think the only thing that really drove sales for this movie was just seeing them all on the screen together for the first time. Because as far as box office goes, I don't have the number. I forgot to write the number down in front of me. But Batman v Superman: The Dawn of Justice was the largest box office take. The largest box office of any of the DCEU movies until Aquaman. And that's going to be a problem that we'll talk about in a few movies. But I just want you to remember that right now. The largest box office. Okay? So then, that was 2016.
That was back when we still had hope.
Yeah. But then, also in 2016, talking about still having hope, also in 2016 was Suicide Squad. The first movie.
Yeah.
And that was bad. There's no other way to put it. I don't care about this rumor about an Ayer cut. It was bad.
No, I don't care about that. It had potential. And I think you see that.
And it was squandered.
Yeah, and I think you see that from the follow-up, The Suicide Squad, because it still takes the same premise and everything, but it's just better in my opinion. But the first Suicide Squad could have been better, but it just was everything that we've already seen repackaged. And honestly, besides Harley Quinn, and I don't know if it's controversial, but I actually liked Will Smith as he was Deadshot.
You can't even remember his name.
Okay.
Yes, it was Deadshot.
I liked him as a character in the movie. I can't speak for how like accurate the character representation was, but like those two performances stood out to me. Everyone else was indeed certainly there. Oh,
Are You in Pain?
Viola Davis, is that her name?
Yeah, Waller.
Yeah. I will remove her entirely from all of this. I love her. No, seriously, like I this is slightly off topic from that, but she is one of the best parts of these movies because she plays the Nick Fury part of kind of interconnecting it. But I love the character because unlike Nick Fury, she sucks. But no one can really argue with her because it's like, look, either I can do this or you can let someone worse do this. Sorry, a little side tangent on my girl there.
For me, Suicide Squad, once again, talking about things I remember, things I don't remember. Other than the awful Joker.
Oh God, dude, yeah, I didn't even get into
Other
Leto.
than that, the one thing that really stands out in my mind, and it's because of what I found out later, not because of what I saw in the movie, is there is a scene in the movie where Harley gets trapped in an elevator with a couple of thugs. She has her elevator fight, okay? You can't tell because they cut it up in editing so poorly. But when she does the walk up the wall and across the ceiling, she actually does that in high heels. But they edit it and chopped it up so poorly that it looks like they did this and filmed it, then they went up and filmed it. And she kept doing that take after take after take to the point where Ayers said, I can't see the wire. Ayers, the director, by the way. I can't see the wire. Where's the wire? And the stunt coordinator was like, there's no wire. She's doing that. And all of a sudden he was like, I've made her do that 15 times. And the stunt coordinator went, she knows.
She feels it, buddy.
Because she was wearing like those stiletto heels too when she did it.
And that tracks to the sequel too, because she did her own stunt work.
The chains.
When she was hanging up, she actually like lifted herself and everything. Which, as I watched that scene, dude, I was impressed.
Yeah. So like that's what I mean. Like they did not do her any favors with how they edited that because it doesn't look like she did it. In my opinion, it should have just been a wide shot where you could just see her walking up the wall across the ceiling and coming down behind the other person.
I mean, you could even do a close-up shot of her feet, like as she gets to the peak or something.
Yeah. But so that's all I remember from Suicide. Oh, and I also remember the hypocrisy of Batman. And this is nothing against Affleck. This scene, this just goes to like terrible writing. That he jumped Deadshot in an alley, while his daughter was there, and he's confronting Deadshot and basically threatening Deadshot, and then says, "Let's not do this in front of the kid."
You know what? I remember you bringing this up to me before. You literally chose when to intercept this guy.
You, the guy that lost your parents in an alley because some dude jumped you, who became Batman because you said a child should never have to experience that in their lives. Jump this. I don't care if he's a criminal. You jumped this chick's this
chick's dad.
You jumped this little girl's dad in an alley, and as far as she knew, threatened his life. Because I can't remember because of how blank this movie is to me, but I think Batman was holding his gun too.
Probably
in that
because
scene.
that's when he had a gun.
Yeah. So and then he has the nuts to say, "Let's not do this in front of the kid." You picked the moment.
Like you honestly could have waited until they got to their destination, because I'm sure he would have had the child go in the door first.
He was taking the kid back to the mother, I think.
Yeah, classic Batman. He doesn't plan things out well.
No, he is notorious for not having a plan.
Unlike Lex Luthor, who had one of the most convoluted plans and just strings of luck to get through the plot of the movie.
And a big old jar of urine.
Yes.
So that was 2016. We had Batman v Superman, and then we had Suicide Squad.
We had some thoughts on that year.
2017 comes out, and we open that with Wonder Woman. And the first thing I'm going to say about this is, while Batman v Superman: The Dawn of Justice had the largest box office until Aquaman, Wonder Woman had the highest net profit of a movie. And I make that distinction because while the box office wasn't as high as Batman v Superman, because there wasn't as much of a budget, because they were only paying for Gal, who at that time was basically an unknown, and Pine, Chris Pine, don't forget him. But like, I don't think he was as expensive as like Affleck and Cavill at that point. That it didn't have as high of a box office, but it made more money for Warner Brothers. And I am biased. Anybody that watches the show on YouTube, if you can see what is off Uncle Britt's shoulder, I am a huge Wonder Woman fan, so I am completely biased when I say this, so take this for what it's worth. But I honestly think Wonder Woman, the 2017 Wonder Woman, for me, is the best the DCEU had to offer. Once again, going back to what do I remember, for me, out of all of the movies I've seen, with the exception of maybe Shazam, this one has the most memorable moments to me. This has her climbing up the tower when she decides that she's going to leave. This has the Amazons holding the Germans off at the beachhead, bows against rifles. This has No Man's Land. Okay, like
I was gonna say.
You cannot deny that as a fantastic scene, a fantastic moment.
Which, while we don't talk about behind the scenes stuff a lot, for that specific scene, they actually had to fight for it.
Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah. That they wanted to take it out.
They wanted, because, and I don't know if this was exactly said. This part could have just been made up in rumors. But I believe the reasoning is that is something Superman could do. That's not something Wonder Woman would be able to do.
Which is a lie.
And so, like, they had to actually fight for this scene and then keep fighting for it even after it was filmed. And it's one of the best scenes in the movie.
And our friend Ben, I don't know if I ever told you this story, but when he saw the movie, because he saw the movie too, did we see it together? No, I don't think so. But he told me, he's a history teacher. He's very much into history, specializes in the World Wars, World War I, World War II.
I didn't know that part.
Okay. Well, when he saw that scene, he loved it. And he said, it makes sense. I said, what are you talking about? He said, one of the common tactics in trench warfare was that you rolled a tank across no man's land. And while the enemy was focusing fire on the tank, the infantry would flank them. He said, so she was literally tanking all of the German fire, which makes sense why when Pine's character said, move in, the U.S. troops knew to flank. Once they got past the shock that this woman in a shield was doing what a Sherman was doing, like what a tank would do, they moved into a standard formation. And I was like, I guarantee they didn't realize they did that when they shot that scene, but it's awesome that it lines up like that.
And if they did know that, more power to them, because that, like, great symbolism.
Yeah.
It's a perfect way to show a character's strength without just someone saying, wow, you really are strong like Superman. It's like, okay, great. That's a great standard.
I think the biggest failure that this movie had was that it fell into the, at this point, rather boring trope of fighting a giant CG monstrosity at the end. Either one of two things should have happened. Either Dr. Poison, who was the one that was working for the Germans and gave that German officer, like, basically magic steroids, like, to juice him up. Dr. Poison should have either been Ares in disguise, or there was no Ares, and she would have had to have dealt with the much larger issue of sometimes man is just bad, which I think would have really elevated this movie storytelling-wise, that they would have tackled an issue like that.
And if they would have done that, if we reorganize things a little bit here. But if they would have done that plot, that actually could have led into when she meets Batman and Superman, she doesn't trust them. She's the odd one out. Like those two already met. They had their dawn of justice. But like they're established, and then you have Wonder Woman come in, and it's not outright like evil against them, but it's just distrust. Like, I've seen what man can do. How are you, speaking to Batman, I would assume, how are you any better than the people I've seen do worse with less equipment than you have? And then you kind of have this cool dynamic where like someone's keeping the other two on account, like they're keeping them in check. And now Batman, even if you kept the stupid gun thing, now has this person who's constantly questioning him. And it's like, you know what? This is how he gets the no-kill rule. Like, even in just this, I feel is a more interesting story than rushing all of these interactions together.
And I also feel like that if they would have gone with the whole no Ares thing, and it would have just been sometimes man is evil, sometimes man is bad, sometimes we just suck, and then she has to deal with that, that also would have made Steve's sacrifice more meaningful, because then she would be having this moment of crisis. There is no influence. This is who they are. Why are they worth saving? And then that's when you do the flashback bit where you find out she can actually hear what Steve is saying, and she realizes it's not all of us. There are good people in the world. There are people worth fighting for. There are people worth saving. Because for me, one of the most heartbreaking moments of the end is not her. It's when Steve's crew runs out of ammo and they're just all huddled around like it was an honor fighting with you. You know what I mean? And then like she thinks back to Steve, and then she sees that and like these people that have been with her through the whole thing. And that is what gets her back into the fight. Like, it could have been so much more interesting, so much more engaging, rather than I'll destroy you fighting this CG. And he wasn't even a good-looking Ares.
No, it was very bland.
In the world where we have God of War.
For those of you that don't know, that is a video game that is based on Greek mythology and, well, currently Norse mythology as well. But
probably one of your favorites, I'd say.
It is in my top 3 favorite video game franchises of all time. But the story stuff in it is just fantastic. Like, you go through the entire Greek pantheon.
And the thing, I guess my biggest issue with Ares, just like how horrible he looked, there was nothing Grecian about the way he looked.
No. There was... They were gods for the sake of them being gods. Like, the Amazonians at least had a style and aesthetic about them. It was very Athens. But yeah, you get to any other one and it was just like, well, this is a god, yes.
So after you have Wonder Woman 2017, also in 2017 is when we have the first release of the Justice League, or if you're one of them, the Justice League. But, and here's the problem. The problems that that movie has were not known until the movie came out. The problems with direction, the problems with conflicting styles, the problems with Henry Cavill's mustache. Okay.
And even didn't it like get a different director halfway through?
Well, that was well known. This was the movie where Zack Snyder was taken out of the picture and Joss Whedon was brought into it. But like, people still wanted to see the Justice League. It was the Justice League. Here's the first problem. Rather, we should say the second problem, because we already talked about Batman v Superman. Here's the second problem of the DCEU. This movie made $661 million. Okay? Once again, I do not have the numbers for Dawn of Justice in front of me, but it made less, box office-wise, than Dawn of Justice. This should have been the peak. This should have been the one that like cemented the DCEU was worth doing. Like, you don't want your Justice League. The Avengers broke $1 billion, and I'm not saying you're at Avengers levels, especially not yet, because we're only what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're only this is only the 6th movie of the series, and only 4 years have passed. Okay? This should have been the high water mark, but it wasn't. So far at this point, Dawn of Justice was the high water mark. And I do believe it's because they shot their load with Dawn of Justice of putting all 3 of them on screen together in the second movie. You could have them in the same movie, but to bring them together as a team in the second movie was a mistake. This should have been the first time you saw the Trinity together and then their backing cast, which at this point, you didn't even know anything about their backing cast, because Flash, Cyborg, and Aquaman, I think that's it, were all introduced in this movie.
So you have 3 intros to 3 core characters, all in the span of a movie, and you're supposed to just somehow be rooting for them to be a team.
Yeah. So there's the second big stumbling block of, in my opinion, of the DCEU. Now we get to 2018, which I honestly can't explain this. I don't have any theories on why this happened. Aquaman broke $1 billion.
I think it was Momoa.
Do you?
I think
Is that? You think
I genuinely think it was Momoa and Hurd pulled in a big audience, pulled in a lot of different audience members, because Momoa was on Game of Thrones. So he still had a bit of pull from that, even though Game of Thrones did not have any pull anymore. Like, I just think that was a good casted movie, so it brought in a different variety of groups.
I can agree with that, because we've talked about this, that the story wasn't anything fantastic, wasn't anything new. I'm not saying it was bad, but it was basically, I mean, his name was even Arthur. It was basically a retelling of King Arthur. You know, he went into the trench, he got the trident, he emerged the king. Okay? But to what you said, I do think the strength of the movie rested in the cast that they surrounded it with. Their side characters as well as their main characters. Everybody from Momoa and Hurd to, oh my, I can't remember the Irish woman's name who used to be married to Tom Cruise, who played the Queen. I'm drawing a complete blank. I keep wanting to say Michelle Pfeiffer, but that's not it. Anyhow, you have her.
Love her.
And then you have a guy whose name I can never remember or pronounce, who played Jango Fett, then later Boba Fett. He was Aquaman's dad.
Oh, yeah.
So you had, and then you also had like just a great supporting cast. You had Willem Dafoe in that, who, like, I really liked his character. He didn't have a whole lot of screen time, but I really liked his character. And I can't remember who played Orm, Ocean Master. I can't remember the actor's name, but I really like him too, and I thought he did a really good job in it. So you had a very, probably honestly the strongest cast in any of the movies, with on-screen charisma, chemistry. Like, that mattered. Even the brothers who were at odds with each other had chemistry with each other. I think that is something else that damaged Dawn of Justice, is that, and I will die on this hill, Henry Cavill and Ben Affleck have no chemistry. I don't care if they are bros behind the scenes. They have no on-screen chemistry.
Well, you can't even count it against them. They've given them no chance to have on.
They
every interaction they've had has been fighting or hostile or just cold towards each other because they didn't know each other, and then all of a sudden they're supposed to be friends, but like they're never in a scene together as friends.
And then you have The Fall. So if Aquaman was the high water mark, no pun intended, and this is like the height of the DCEU, then you have The Fall. The next year, 2019, you have Shazam. And there was a massive, massive dip in box office revenue. This is, at this moment, the lowest revenue any DC movie has brought in. And I feel like there are a number of reasons for that. One of the things that I feel may have motivated people to go see Aquaman was that they saw the character in Justice League. They had an interest in seeing him. Momoa's Aquaman engaged them so much because this was an Aquaman we had never seen before. Let's go see his movie. Let's go see what that's about. To what you said, true. Jason probably still had a huge Game of Thrones following that wanted to see him in a role that was not entirely dissimilar from the Game of Thrones.
But it was so much more lighthearted that it was kind of like, okay, this is going to be better no matter what happens here.
Now, Shazam, if you read comics, if you're familiar with the comics, Shazam, the original Captain Marvel, is actually an interesting character. To the average moviegoer, nobody knows who this guy is. Nobody knows what his deal is. He's a C-list character at best. And this was his origin. This was his first movie.
Great name, though, I gotta say.
Shazam.
Like, that stands out.
Yeah.
Even if you don't know the story, if you're like, oh, Superman, Batman, Shazam, like, yeah, it didn't do as big as it could have, and it would have helped cement the name into pop culture better. But I just think the name itself, Shazam, pops. I think it's just a really cool name for a superhero.
And as far as my thoughts on this, I do think this is a good movie. It did not do well at the box office. Like we said, it was very, very low. As a matter of fact, I think I have the numbers here. Where's it at? I do not. But I thought it was very good. It has one of my favorite moments in the DC movies whenever he shares the power with the family. I really like that moment. I think that is a solid moment. Because there's a little tongue-in-cheek joke when he says, "Say my name," and they just say, "Billy," and he goes, "No, the name I say when I become this." Because as a kid, he's trying to reenact the way that it was done for him, but they're also kids and they don't know who Shazam is. You know what I mean? But then, especially Freddy, because it hits me in the comic too. Freddy has a limp. Freddy has that crutch. And then it pans to him, and he's the first one that's levitating and flying. He can hardly walk as a human. He flies as a god, and I love that for Freddy.
The whole movie to me is just
family.
It's family. Of the DCEU right now. We're not going Fast and Furious.
Okay.
I can feel it brewing. Of the DCEU movies so far, this is the first one that I would say is just fun.
Yes.
It is a fun movie. It doesn't take itself overly serious. It's a kid who got superhero powers. Yeah. And it almost plays out exactly how you want it to. He does dumb crap all the time throughout it because he's like, oh, I wonder if I can punch through that wall. Oh my God, the wall's coming down.
Or when he's doing the street performance, lightning from my hands. And for as much as I like Wonder Woman, and as much as I love that movie, it's not fun.
No.
I enjoy watching it, don't get me wrong, but it's heavy, it's dark, it's kind of depressing, especially towards the end.
It's a rather somber movie.
Yeah, but no, you're absolutely right. Shazam was the first ray of light in this series. Which brings me to the second reason I think it may have tanked, is because it was such a departure from what the series had been doing so far. It was such a departure from what the established fan base was feeling for this movie, that even though Aquaman had lighthearted moments, had jokes, it wasn't on the level as this. This was really the first comic book on screen, I feel. And I don't think people knew how to took that with what came before. I can't really remember, but this may have also been the first time they accused the DC movies of, quote unquote, copying Marvel. Which and I'm not sure I can argue that.
I mean, literally, I just said this is the first movie I would consider as just fun.
Yeah.
And it's the one that feels most like Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to say that Shazam doesn't hold up comparatively to them, because I actually said it earlier today to you. I think Shazam holds up as an independent superhero movie. That you could just put that sole movie on, and it's just a fun little superhero romp. You watch a kid get accustomed to his powers.
Yeah.
Like, you can just take that as it is. A lot of these other movies are so interconnected and or just so heavy that it's like, well, yeah, I could watch this, but if I want to feel good about myself, I'm going to watch the next two so I know they're okay.
Yeah, like, I watch Wonder Woman, and I love it, and I feel good watching it, because for me, being a fan of Wonder Woman, pining for a TV show, like, we had the Linda Carter show, but, like, in the new age, like, she didn't even get her own cartoon during the animated years. There was Batman, there was Superman. She didn't get her own series, which I always feel is a bit of a slight. But to finally see her on the big screen, I thought they did her well. I liked the origin story. Yes, there is the comparison that, like, they did the same thing that Captain America did. But the problem is that, like, Captain America and Wonder Woman do have the same origins in, like, World War II. But, like...
I mean, believe it or not, it was a world war, so it did affect a lot of different places.
The fact that they changed it from World War II to World War I kind of helped, but, like, those comparisons were still being made. But when I watch Wonder Woman, I don't come out laughing.
No.
Whereas in Shazam, the scene where they're with a realtor trying to buy a lair is hilarious to me. You know, something with maybe some lava or a waterfall. Oh, yeah. And he's just, like, hitting him in the shoulder.
Oh, dude, and not to mention the parents in Shazam. The adoptive parents.
Yes.
You want to talk about some of the most supportive parents.
For real.
Like, it didn't matter if they thought their kids were out doing crime. They were like, guys, you better make sure each other's safe, and you better get back here. If the cops come after, we handle it.
Yeah.
But you get back here. You get back to this house. Like, it is such a good family dynamic. And it's weird pointing that out, because DC does seem to nail that very specific dynamic.
Family?
Like a dysfunctional, functional family.
Well, and I think that is sort of rooted in their comics, because if you look at DC more than Marvel definitely has their legacy characters. I mean, for goodness sakes, they say the Bat family, the Super family. You know, like, and there are others that have, like, their legacy characters. Like, even Black Canary now has Red Canary, who is, like, a teenage version of her. So there are legacy characters. There are, like, dysfunctional family units within DC Comics, but, like, that's kind of their thing. And to see that carry over into Shazam, like, I think they did a really good job with that. Because I think they also did a good job, maybe taking it a little too far, but, like, when we get to Blue Beetle and we start talking about that, I think they did the family dynamic very well in Blue Beetle too, which we'll be talking about once we get there. Now, moving from 2019 to 2020, this is where things get a little hairy, because, like, I still stand by 2020, the pandemic and the lockdown changed the way we view movies, changed the way the average moviegoer looks at movies. That, like, especially with streaming now, I don't think the box office anymore is a good metric of how popular a movie is, because I do think that you have your people that are still going to go want to see a movie on the big screen. But I think there is a very large demographic, no matter what the generation is, that just want to wait for it to come to streaming, where they don't have to pay for overpriced snacks, they don't have to pay for an overpriced ticket, they don't have to share the experience with a crowd that may not exactly be the best crowd to see a movie with.
Some people, like, the people that like going to see a movie in the theater are paying for the experience. The people that are waiting for it to come out on DVD are the people that just want to watch a movie.
And I don't think the movie-going experience is that great anymore.
It's not. We've talked about this.
Yes.
Going to a movie theater sucks anymore, regardless of what the movie is. But if you accompany that with a bad movie, it just leaves an even worse taste in your mouth.
Like, I will still go see my Godzilla movies on the big screen, because it's Godzilla. You want to see them bigger than life. And there's a few other ones, like Dune, coming up at the end of the month. I'm going to go see that in the theater because it's Dune. It's a thing for my family. I think we've talked about this before. We're going to take my dad, that whole deal. And I will probably see, jumping into the future in 2025, I will probably see the Superman movie in the theaters just because it's kicking off the new leg of the DC movies. It's kind of like, I don't want to have another Endgame regret.
Yeah.
But that's in the future. So getting back to this, so 2020 was the pandemic, and people started looking at box office, and I'm not entirely sure box office, like I said, is a good metric. So when the data is available, I actually have right here what they did in the box office versus what their performance was on streaming, if that information was available. Now, having said that, we kick off 2020 with Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn. This movie was bad. First of all, what genius in marketing made that the title? What genius in marketing made your main character the last two words of a title that does not fit on a movie marquee? That, like, the only thing a lot of movie theaters were putting up was Birds of Prey.
Yeah.
And then 3 weeks into the movie's run, they changed the name to Harley Quinn and Birds of Prey, at which point most movie theaters were probably like, screw it, we're just keeping up Birds of Prey.
But I have to say this, while I won't defend the movie by any means, it does have some standout moments for me.
Oh, it does not. The cocaine moment is about it.
Look, man, when she is hiding behind the stack of cocaine and there are people shooting it and she's freaking out and doesn't know what to do, and then you just notice all the powder floating in the air around her and she just starts taking deep breaths and just starts killing everyone. Phenomenal scene.
Oh, yeah, that's
great
right.
writing.
That's
like,
right.
it redeemed the whole movie. I kid you not. It was phenomenal.
Okay. For me, and once again, I understand they make changes between adaptation to comics. They took three of the most interesting characters, most interesting female characters from DC Comics, and turned them all into nothings. Like, oh, I am so offended by Huntress. I am so offended by Cassandra Cain, or Cassie Cain, in that movie. What they did to her, she was my favorite Batgirl. I've told you the story about her not being allowed to speak, having to read body language, raised by the League of Assassins. And then Black Canary with no scream, and Huntress just anger issues. Like, she reminded, like, when we watched Mutant Mayhem, and they told Raph, you have an anger problem, and he said, it's not a problem. I could see Huntress doing that same line. As a matter of fact, she may have said something like that in the movie.
Yeah.
It wasn't good. And then her costume looked like a trash bag with a hole in it for her head.
Yeah.
It looked like a trash bag poncho. So we're just going to skip past the rest of this movie.
Yeah.
So that was the only thing that came out in 2020. And its box office was not great. But once again, it came out during the pandemic. I could not find any information on what it did streaming. They may not have been tracking data for public, or they just didn't want to tell people. Because that's the funny thing about streaming. They don't have to tell us the numbers, and they might be able to lie. 2021 saw the movie that I don't want to talk about, but also Wonder Woman 1984. That was not a good movie either. It was nonsensical. There were plot points that were just dropped in. The whole Steve thing coming back and inhabiting another man's body. What they did to Max Lord and that whole story arc. Like, it was just so... It was nothing. It was a nothing burger. Like, that's one of those movies that is, like, as much as I love Wonder Woman, the only thing that stands out to me was a special effects scene where she was riding the lightning, literally riding the lightning.
And it was in the trailer.
Yeah, and it was in the trailer, but more to the point, there was no explanation in the movie as why she was doing that. Remember, first she was, like, she was running, and then she was trying to learn how to fly. She threw out the lasso, whipped a lightning bolt, whipped another lightning bolt, and then she was flying. Why were those lightning bolts there? Where did they come from? It would have been cool if that would have just been like Dad going, hey kid, here you go, here's some help. Or if she would have called out to him for help, or if there would have been a storm.
Or somehow the lasso of truth just now has elemental bending abilities.
Well, that's there is a lasso that does that, but that's not the lasso of truth. We'll talk about that later.
So you see what I'm saying then?
Yes. It's actually, I think, one of the where's the lasso? I think Cassie has it. Sandsmark. I think that's who has it now.
Yeah.
Right. But also, Cheetah looked awful. Like, I was so excited. Like, I'm not a fan of Kristen Wiig.
Neither am I.
But when I saw her in the trailer with that attitude and wearing that, like, leopard or that cheetah print leather jacket, and just like her and Diana squaring off in the White House while she's still in human form, I was like, okay, I can get behind this. She's trying, you know, this isn't SNL Kristen Wiig. This is actor Kristen Wiig. But then, like, they did her no favors with that cheetah do. Like, it was bad. And then, like, she just...
They also, a lot of people don't talk about this, but I 100% feel like it got its aesthetic being in the 80s from Stranger Things. And I'm not saying that Stranger Things was the first thing to ever go back to that aesthetic, but when Stranger Things released, I think it was the 3rd season, and it had that 80s aesthetic of just neon color and everything.
Oh, did it?
I feel like it just, like, reinvigorated interest in that decade, because I started seeing a bunch of stuff that had that, like, neon, bright colors, big hair aesthetic.
See, for me, it all started with Grand Theft Auto Vice City, but I'm older than you, so...
I mean, I've played that.
You know they're making a sequel to that?
They're making GTA 6, man.
I think that's going to be set in the same city as Vice City was. Anyhow, back to this. I can't make a comparison because, believe it or not, folks, I've never watched Stranger Things. I knew it took place in the 80s. I also know it's why we're having this whole Dungeons and Dragons renaissance now.
For sure.
But I didn't realize they went with the neon and pastel version of the 80s, the Miami Vice look of the 80s.
The mall look.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of the season takes place in a mall.
So and this movie started in a mall. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I don't even get why it was set in the 80s, why it was set in 84, other than what you just said. I never drew the connection because I didn't watch the show. Stranger Things was very popular. Stranger Things is set in the 80s. Maybe they were trying to ride that coattail. I don't know.
No, I mean, that's purely just me throwing that out there.
No, but it makes sense. Now, the other thing that we got in 2021, Zack Snyder's Justice League,
Woo!
a.k.a. the Snyder Cut, that was a thing for about a week.
And we'll both be honest with y'all. We didn't watch it.
No, I did.
I'll be honest with y'all. I didn't watch it.
I watched it because I did not watch it on release day because I did not want to give them the view on opening day. As a matter of fact, I don't think I wanted to give them the view for the first week. I think I waited a week and a half before I watched it. I watched it. I'll be completely honest. And it happened. It definitely happened. And I watched it because I decided if I was going to hate on it, I wanted to know why I hated it.
I respect that.
And that movie could have been 45 minutes shorter if they would have just kept all of the slow motion out of it. Also, I feel like the point where they load up into the big bat flying brick, if you just watched the Justice Justice League, the Joss Whedon version of Justice League, up to that point, and then switched to the Snyder Cut. Come at me, YouTube. Come at me, people. It's the same movie up until that point, with just extra slow-mo.
I'd believe that.
And taking out some of the stupid dad jokes. But, first of all, the release the Snyder Cut campaign was ridiculous. It was absolutely ridiculous. The more they pushed, the more Warner Brothers stepped back, the more and more they didn't want to make this. What got this made was not necessarily their campaign. It was that HBO Max now, but at the time HBO Max was not doing good. They did not have any like real exclusive content. That it was even between seasons of things like Titan and Doom Patrol because of the pandemic. All of the series that they were moving from DC streaming service, which I think was just called DCEU at the time, the DC streaming service, bringing it over to Max, they couldn't do the series. So they cut Snyder a check and said, go ahead and finish your movie. We'll make this a Max exclusive. That is what motivated them creating the Snyder Cut, because they were foolish enough to believe that all of these people that were hashtag release the Snyder Cut, all of these people that were jumping in on live streams, that were going to events, that were like interrupting everything Warner Brothers, not just DC, Warner Brothers was trying to do with release the Snyder Cut. They were foolish enough to think that these people would all of a sudden become subscribers to HBO Max, where in reality they probably signed up for the 1 month free or whatever it was at the time, watched the Snyder Cut as much as they could in that time span, and then never thought about it again.
Yeah, and that's worth mentioning because since it came out and the couple months after it, when everyone was like, oh yeah, we got it, now what, no one's talked about it. No one goes back to the Snyder Cut. No one goes back and is like, oh, see, this is what we could have had it come out earlier.
Except the Snyder Bros.
And even they don't bring it up that much anymore.
Oh, you don't live on Twitter.
I don't have it.
They talked about it a lot on Twitter. There was this whole movement after James Gunn came out, and we'll get to the announcement as well, but after he made his announcement about the DCU, there was this big push from the Snyder Bros to sell the Snyderverse like that's its own thing and not actually DC to Netflix so that he could do it on Netflix.
Oh my God, dude, just let it die.
So, first of all, the first thing that I do not believe is I do not believe the Snyder Cut ever truly existed. Because he said, it's done, it's in the can, all it needs is some editing. Then why did they have to give him $70 million, rumors up to $100 million to finish this movie if it already existed? Why did he need 70 to 100 million extra dollars for reshoots? I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all. It didn't exist. That's all there is to it. Like, if you still think it existed before this, I'm sorry, you were wrong.
There's no way it could. Even if you're thinking from a business standpoint, if they had that cut already together and they just needed to put some finishing touches on it to make it coherent,
they wouldn't have needed to bring him back.
They wouldn't have paid him nearly as much outside of just being able to use his name.
Because if it would have already been in the can, they could have just spliced it together, said, here's... They didn't even need to use his name.
They didn't.
They could have just called it the director's cut.
Yes, but given where they were at, they wanted the name.
So I don't believe it. I don't believe it existed. And I know there were talk shows, because I still blame him for this too, for like stoking the fire. That Jason Momoa was on talk shows where he was saying, it exists, I've seen it. Yeah. Momoa is a giant troll, in case no one has figured that out yet.
I've seen it, start to finish. Have you? Have you even seen the regular Justice League?
So that was a giant money pit for them. They gave $70 to $100 million to Zack Snyder to create his version of the Justice League. Remember, it was originally announced as a 4-part miniseries, that they were going to try and space it out over a month, because then they wouldn't have been able to just do like the free trial. They would have had to have subscribed for at least a month, and odds are they might have forgotten about it, just let it kept riding, whatever. But then he wanted to make it I don't even remember, it was like over 4 hours, and it was way too long.
Then they made the black and white version.
Woohoo!
So if you really, really want to get delved into the nitty gritty,
I really don't. And that's all we're going to say about that. So after 2021, we go in a completely different direction. And this is the tail end of the pandemic. Oh, one thing that I forgot to mention about Wonder Woman 1984. And while I loved it for this, because I didn't go to the theater, I stayed home and watched it, I do realize this was a fantastic mistake of same-day release on streaming. And maybe eventually the movie industry will get there if, like, when they start to accept it, like, people just aren't going to the movies anymore. But I do think that, like, same-day release on streaming for big movies like this was a mistake, no matter how much I loved it. Because the next one to suffer from that was 2022. This is the tail end of the pandemic. The Suicide Squad. James Gunn's Suicide Squad. The good one.
which I gotta say, The Suicide Squad is probably my favorite DCEU movie.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because to me, it's the only one that I don't see massive flaws throughout. Like, it's fun. The cast is great. I mean, my God, John Cena stands out because he even got his own show.
And who knew Idris Elba could do comedy? Yeah. Him and Cena playing off of each other in that movie is fantastic.
Him and the rats.
Oh, man. You want to talk about, like... You do your story first. I'm sorry. You go ahead.
But it's just... Shazam was a fun movie. It was the first just fun movie. Wonder Woman, I would say, was a good movie. Mm-hmm. But The Suicide Squad was the first one to me that actually felt like, okay, this is actually something I haven't seen. Mm-hmm. Not all in all, not every aspect, but the way it came together, the way it still remained a dysfunctional team that you never were even sure if there really was a singular lead to the team. There was the leader,
yeah,
but he didn't always do that much.
Yeah.
Like, it was just a fun, well thought out, well paced, well written movie, in my opinion.
And I didn't realize until just now, it leads into what you were just talking about that DC does well. There's family element to it. Bloodsport is doing this because Waller is threatening his daughter. Mm-hmm. Later, we find out Cena is doing this because of inferiority and, daddy issues. Ratcatcher 2 has that whole side plot about what happened to her dad. And even Bloodsport has that issue about why he's scared of rats because of what his dad did to him. So, yeah.
And you even had Ratcatcher 2 over him when the rats were coming in at the end.
That's what I was going to say. That is a standout moment for me when she calls the rats and he's having his freak out. I want that on a poster. When she's holding the thing that summons the rats with one hand, like that Pied Piper flute, whatever you want to call it. When she's holding that with one hand, and she's holding him with the other, I've got you, I have you, it'll be okay. When I saw that for the first time, I was like, my God, that is that is going to be a very underrated scene. And that's going to be a scene that a lot of people don't understand, everything that's happening right here.
And it's honestly a great moment to show that masculinity can still be gentle.
Yes.
I'm not going to use the word fragile because fragile masculinity is its own thing. Not getting into that, but I would call it gentle masculinity. You're letting yourself feel the fear that is very real to this character because you saw where it came from, and you had another character who, for all intents and purposes, they developed a father-daughter dynamic.
They absolutely 100% did, yeah.
And she was the one holding him.
Yeah.
And if you played it the wrong way, it could be traumatizing that she was the one that had to step up, but it didn't come off that way.
No.
It came off as, we have to do this, you understand that, I understand that. I understand this still is going to be hard for you. I'm going to be here for you, but we still need to do it.
And one of the things that I love about it is when they built up to this moment, when he talked about his phobia of rats, when he was first dealing with, and I can't remember what her rat's name was, but when he was first dealing with that rat always being there were comedic moments to it. Like, Elba was playing them very sincerely. Because he knew as an actor what was coming. Like, I can't make this a joke. I can have jokes about it, but I have to play this as a legit phobia. Because in that scene was terrifying for him. He was legitimately having a breakdown. He was screaming. He was holding his head. He was useless.
He was vulnerable.
And it was like completely out of his control. And I loved that whole moment. But also, like, John Cena, man.
Yeah.
Come on.
Oh my God, dude. Even their whole shot right at the end. Because they were building up to that the whole movie, like, oh, I'm a faster shot than you. I'm a faster shot than you.
And that was something else that I loved. That, like, when Bloodsport, like, when the floors were dropping, and Bloodsport came down, no words were said. Ratcatcher was on the ground crying. Peacemaker was standing over her with a gun. That was all Bloodsport needed to know. And he went full dad and was like, killer dad, but dad nonetheless. It was like, you're threatening her, I'm shooting you. Like, I loved that. No explanation needed. And I don't have the Peacemaker series on here, but I feel like that's something that, like, we could talk about later in another episode, because there was a lot that happened in that movie that lent to... Because in this movie, Peacemaker was not a very deep character. But I think it's because Gunn knew that there was the potential for having this, that what they did with him in the series, some of Cena's finest work, in and out of the ring, to be completely honest.
Yes. It is a quirky superhero show, don't get us wrong, but my God.
Yeah.
It gets so deep on, like, some serious topics.
Hey everybody, Mac here. So this episode went way longer than me and Uncle Britt were expecting. We had a lot to talk about, and the DCEU is not a small topic. So the recording itself went into about 3 hours long, so we split it up into 2 parts, part 1 and part 2. This is the end of part 1. Next week we'll have part 2. We'll see you then.